everybody. Happy Sunday. We are here to talk about another Sunday devotional. And I am film critic Rachel Wagner and joined by my friend Chris. Once again, thank you so much, Chris, for coming and talking about a very interesting topic today that we have. We've been going over the beatitudes of the last few weeks. And Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I just had my coffee, so
Okay.
I'm really ready to go now.
Okay, good. So we are talking about treasures in heaven. The scripture says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So we're going to dive into this topic, figure out what exactly the Lord is talking about when he talks about treasures and where your heart is. And what's your gut reaction when you first hear this counsel, this commandment?
Yeah, it's funny because it's right there where he's about to talk about worry. So I'm kind of excited to get into this a little bit as we dive deeper, but it's interesting how he talks about worry, and then where your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. Because it's so easy to take our treasure and make it the things that we can see or the things that we can earn in life. And so our treasure is our career goals. Our treasure is our stock portfolio. Our treasure is our success in this way or that way. And to me, I look at that and go, that's all just such shakeable stuff. And when that's our treasure, and that's where our desires go, then no wonder we're so full of anxiety all the time. And so that was my initial reaction when we were going through and kind of picking this and looking at it. It's really interesting how where he talks about the importance of where you put your treasure, and then from there goes into a whole bunch of stuff about worry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm excited to dive into that because I had never taken it that way, this scripture. So it's going to be really interesting. What I immediately think of is about the lack of a lasting value of material possessions. I think about that we think that these things that seem fun and fancy and everything like that will provide us joy, but the value, aside from when you're talking about life-sustaining goods and things like that, like there's something important that's kind of a different level of discussion. But we think that these toys and these things will bring us joy, but they are not long lasting. They might be fun, but you just think about the temporary nature of what the world counts as treasures compared to what the Lord provides. And I always think about the young man who comes to Jesus and he says, what is the greatest commandment? What do I need to do to get into heaven? He says, I don't murder, I don't commit adultery, I do not steal, I do not bear false witness. All these things I have kept from my youth. What lack I yet? And Jesus said unto him, if thou wilt be perfect, go and sell thou all that thou hast and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasures in heaven, and come and follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, verily I say unto you, that a rich man shall hardly enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Which is, I think is, is very interesting. And what do you think about that story? And why do you think it is so hard for, as he says, a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven?
Well, I think the interesting thing about that is back in that day, and you can kind of see it in some Christian denominations now, they thought that material wealth was a blessing from God. In other words, they thought that wealth was their reward for being so righteous. Mm-hmm. And so for Jesus to say, it's almost impossible for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven, that was almost an impossible saying for anybody to, try to grasp, because here they are thinking, are you serious? Wasn't this supposed to be a sign of God's blessing that I was doing it right? And now are you, are you serious right now, Jesus? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And so the hardship of that, because when you start looking at your material wealth, oh, this is a reward from God because you've just done so good. And then here's Jesus saying, don't store up treasure here, store up treasure in heaven. You want to be perfect? Well, fine, sell your possessions. Because what I think Jesus is saying here is he's not condemning material wealth. I mean, we live in America. You got material
Hmm.
wealth. I got material wealth. We
Yeah.
wouldn't call ourselves wealthy, but we have it. God isn't condemning having things or having material wealth, but what he's condemning is putting all of our hopes and our dreams on that. You
Hmm.
know, sometimes we make God a means to get wealth, and God is nobody's means to anything. God is the end. He's all encompassing. So we should be coming to him for him and not for what he could do for us. And I think when you look at this story, this is what Jesus is telling him. He's like, you got to shift your focus. You're trusting your wealth thinking it's this great reward, but your great reward is God himself, and you need to put your trust in him.
Yeah. I also think that sometimes we have sort of special sins in a way, like the ones that we like. We know that we probably should be working on that thing, but we're like, oh, I'm going to keep it over here to the
Yep.
side,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yep.
and but I'm doing all these other really good things. And I think this is an example of
That is
Jesus totally
also a great way to see that. Yeah.
calling out this young man who he knew that was the secret kind of little sin of this man, and whereas other people may not have had that same problem, and so he knew that one issue he could go through all these others. Oh, I'm doing that, I'm doing that, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. And he knew that was the thing that was going to be the real test. Can you obey that far? And we think about the great examples of obedience in the scriptures, somebody like Abraham, of course, being willing to obey no matter what. And I think it's really incredible. I also think that part of the reason why it's so hard for a rich man to make it into heaven is that usually with money and wealth comes power, and
Yeah.
power is very, very hard to use righteously. I mean, we saw it with the old kings, that Israelites wanted a king. They wanted to be ruled, and every single one of them had a fall from grace and ended up not. You've got Solomon, you've got David, you've got Saul, and so it's an interesting thing that the saying goes, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there's very few people like George Washington who was willing to let go of power and was willing to say, I'm only going to serve for this amount of time and not let the power go to his head.
Yeah. Power, that is difficult. I mean, you see it all the time in real life. People who are nice and genuine, and all of a sudden money gets in the way. Somebody dies in the family, it's a tragedy, and then all of a sudden we don't care anymore. It's all about the money. And it becomes amazing how that money and the power that it can offer is so corrupting. And I just watched The Founder for the first time the other day, the movie about Ray Kroc taking McDonald's from the McDonald's brothers is basically what it is. And as I was watching the movie, it's funny because I really only started to think about it in this way when we got closer to recording and I started to, study for,
Yeah.
what we were talking about. And I was like, dang it, I wish I had this in my video, because what Ray Kroc was doing is his treasure was power. His treasure was his ego. His treasure was all this material wealth that he could get. And because that was his treasure, that's where his desire was. And there is this incredible quote in the movie. Michael Keaton is great in that movie, but there's this incredible quote in the movie where he's saying to the McDonald's brothers, he says, business is war. And I'm going to kind of, I guess, paraphrase the quote a little bit, but he says, if I saw my competitor drowning, I would go take a hose and put it in his face. And I think what that shows you is exactly where his treasure was, exactly where his heart was. And you saw exactly what that did to the desires of his heart. You saw how much that totally and completely corrupted him as he was pursuing power, he was pursuing his ego, and he was pursuing material wealth.
Yeah. And really, I can say for one of my grandfathers was very, very successful in his business, but he was not a happy man and did not provide the contentment that you would think that having such material possessions would provide. He had so many other things to be grateful for in his life, but he was a pretty angry person. And it's such a contrast between my other grandfather, who I've mentioned a bunch of times, who was a school counselor, lived in a small house with having 8 kids, and was a soldier in the war and all of that. It was this very simple, humble man, but somebody who, whenever you saw him, he had a smile on his face. And so it's an interesting thing that we sometimes think the things that are going to make us happy just really actually aren't. They're not. That was something I actually had a problem with the movie La La Land. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if you saw that, but
I haven't seen that one yet. No.
oh, you haven't? Well, the thing about it is there's this idea that if they achieve their dreams, that those dreams are going to make them happy, whether it be the dream of being an actress or the dream of being owning a jazz place. But the problem is those kind of things are not long lasting in your happiness. Like, that's basically your
Yeah.
job. And it
Yep.
doesn't matter if you have like what seems like the fanciest job. In the end, what is compelling in our lives is our relationships with other people. And that was something that kind of irritated me about the movie, is that it's good in other ways, but I just felt like the relationship was treated so lightly, when that's the thing that actually matters. All this other stuff, the jazz music and and the acting and everything's like, that's great and it can be fulfilling, but in the end, it's our relationships that truly make a difference in our
Yeah.
lives. And so, yeah, that's where our treasure should lie, in things that actually matter. And before too long, there's going to be the next person doing whatever it is that you're doing, the
Yep.
next big name. I mean, every once in a while you'll have somebody who transcends eras and you really remember, but even then, you can't live for that kind of thing. You have to live to uh, for the people in your lives. That's where real happiness and enrichment. A lot of those people that we remember, like somebody like a Mozart, was not a very happy man
Yeah.
in his life. And so anyway, it's an interesting thing. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, I also I was thinking a little bit about how in this day and age, there's also an easy trap to fall into, where you can place your treasure in the in the gaining of social media wealth,
Oh,
as opposed
yes.
to, I mean, sometimes that can actually make you wealthy, but that as opposed to the relationships, opposed to the building of the kingdom that we're doing, we place the greater value on, did we get it, how many likes did we get, how many people did we that we interacted with on social media. And it can be a way of sort of boasting our wealth and boasting our look at our great life, look at this perfect existence that I have, then I'm gonna take all these selfies and everything like that. And I think that can be a way of sort of uh, being like this young man who couldn't
Oh,
give
yeah.
away all of his earthly possessions.
See, here's the funny thing about what you're talking about with the social media. Sometimes with us in social media, what we do is, we look at people's outward success and we compare that to our inward struggle. I mean, we look at YouTube
Yeah.
stars and we look at social media stars and we think they achieved it overnight. They had some natural talent. And so we're trying our best. And it seems no matter what we do, we can't get the exact same traction. We're following their advice. We're following the things that they did and we can't get that same traction. But what we're not seeing is their inward struggle and how much they struggled because they weren't a success overnight. It took work and it took sacrifice. It took a lot of effort to get to where they are. And we don't often see that. And we don't see the struggle that goes into each post or each video or each thing that they do. And I know for me, when I started my YouTube channel, I mean, one of the main things that I wanted to do was have a place for Christian nerds to come and hang out and nerd out, because that was
Yeah.
something that I really wanted. Like, I love movies, I love superheroes, and I love God. And I wanted to have a way to talk about my faith with those movies, because with movies, I can see faith in them. And so it starts pure, right? And yet sometimes I have found myself caring more about how many likes did I get? How many views did I get? How come
Yeah.
my subscribe count is only where it is and not over here? And before you know it, what that produces is worry that I'm not enough, worry that I am not smart, worry that I'm not doing something right. It produces envy over those that are doing so good. And I'm like, but what's wrong with what I'm doing? And it's amazing how when you put your treasure in that wrong place, and it's subtle. It's like, it's not like sometimes you're not making a conscious choice that this is where my treasure is. But when you realize you're shifting there, stop, I got to take my treasure and I got to put it back where it belongs. And so that's
Yeah.
me being open about a struggle I've had,
Yeah.
sometimes even with the social media thing. And I
Even
think
doing
what,
this Sunday devotional sometimes, because I felt so spiritually motivated. And then sometimes they, none of them have done great. And sometimes that can be frustrating, because it's like, oh, I feel so spiritually motivated. If I could just get the message out, I think it would help people.
yeah,
But I have to remember that that the main reason I really believe that God wanted me to do this is just for me, that it was a
yeah,
gift, and for me and you, and
hmm,
that may be all He wants us to do with it, and I have to be okay with that.
yeah,
And that can be hard sometimes, because it's just like, oh, I want to reach more people. I want to share this, like you're saying, with your idea of sort of Christian nerd utopia. You want to share it, you want it to connect, and feel like it could help all these people. But maybe that's just not what the Lord had intended, and we don't know why.
yep,
But yeah, there's definitely there can be a tendency to, I think, boast on social media, even about spiritual things, like, look how great I am, look what I'm doing. And it kind of made me think of Matthew 6:2, and he says, therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. And so
yep,
what we're doing is planting seeds that will help us for the rest of our lives. I feel
yes,
like each week with this Sunday devotional, and uh, we have richer rewards than a bunch of likes. And as much as I'd want that and I wish I could have it, if I'm honest, I have to remember that that the rewards that I have gained are worth way more than any of that.
oh yeah. Something I worked in Christian radio for about 14 years before I started doing this YouTube thing. So I worked in professional ministry for about 14 years. So here's something that's popular to say, but not popular to follow up with actions. It's popular to say, if only one, if only one life gets impacted by what I'm doing, it's all worth it.
Yeah,
But it's not
even your
popular to
own.
back up with your actions, because it's too easy to get caught up in the numbers game, and that you want the numbers because that's the measure of my success.
Yeah.
But God is
Even your
saying,
own life,
yes.
even if that's the only one. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's
exactly.
true. It is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so onto this topic of worry that because I have found myself in that cycle of worry many times in my life. And a lot of times doing this social media thing, where I find myself in the most worry is, how stupid am I? Like, if I can't get the followers here or there, how stupid am I? But then I
Right.
get all those encouraging comments from people, and it's like, no, this is the community that I'm building is the one that I wanted to build when I started. So I'm being a success in the way that I dreamed I would be when I started. It's easy to get caught up in those numbers. And what I found is I get caught up in those numbers because I'm getting worried. I'm getting worried that I'm not enough because the treasure's in the wrong place. And that's what Jesus is talking about. If you look at Matthew chapter 6, he starts telling people during that time who didn't have a promise of food the next day because of money. He's saying, don't worry about money. Don't worry about your clothes. Life is more than all of that. Look at the birds. See,
Yeah.
God cares about the birds and they're fed. Look at the flowers. Look at the splendor they're dressed in. Not even Solomon in all of his glory was dressed in such splendor. And then he goes on to say, you are worth so much more to God than the birds. And he ends it all with Matthew 6:33, which has become one of my life verses. So this is the New Living Translation. It says, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. Right before that verse, Jesus says, God knows what you need. And there's many times in the Bible where Jesus says, before you even open your mouth to ask him, he knows what you need. And he's saying when we put God first and his ways first, when he is our treasure and becomes the desire of our heart, those other things that we need will be added to us. I love what I've done on social media because I've learned things I never would have otherwise learned about SEO. I learned how to grow. I learned how to take my production stuff to levels that I wouldn't have taken it before. I've learned so many great things.
Yeah.
And why get caught up in those numbers?
Mm-hmm.
If God is my treasure and he's the true desire of my heart, then the things I need, he's going to provide. And so how about I just trust him and make him the treasure of my heart?
Yeah. And I know it's easy to say, like, you and I, we are very fortunate, and there's a lot of people that do struggle to get, food on the table, that are
Mm-hmm.
struggling to, feed their family, all of that. And I understand that. And I understand that. I don't mean to dismiss the great worry that
Yes.
that causes, but I do believe that God can use anybody to further his work, and that sometimes he forces us in situations where we do have to have we have to have faith.
Yeah.
And I think about one of the ladies on my mission. Sister Turner was her name, and she was just such a light in her very, very poor neighborhood. And she would go around and she would collect cans. She would get them from trash cans, from the neighbors, from everything. Everybody knew that was Sister, that was Mary Turner. That was what she did. And so that she could have enough money to feed people. Like sometimes she would feed the missionaries, but she would feed people that didn't have enough. And everybody knew there was always meal at Mary Turner's house. And she always had milk, so she could give a gallon of milk to anybody who needed it at any time. She would go to Aldi's, which is a place in the Midwest that has really good deals on food, and she would stock up on things. And you go to her house for dinner, and she would have, like, I don't know, she'd have like lasagna and lo mein or something like that. Just whatever was at Aldi's that was cheap, she would buy, and you would get these meals. And she was such a light and such a wonderful person. And anybody in their situation can be a tool to the Lord to use to be able to further his work. I really believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mean to diminish that worry either of when you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
Yeah.
At the same time, I mean to maximize the promise of Jesus, because these aren't my words in Matthew chapter 6.
Yeah.
These are his promises that, come on, God cares about the birds, and they
Yeah.
don't store stuff in barns, the way we try to have savings and things like that. Like, they don't store, and God provides their need, and you are of so much more value than the birds.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that faith level where we know we're worried, and we know we got the stress, and we know we got things to do. But at the same time, if we take that way and commit it to the Lord and surrender it to him and say, God, I'm stressed. You get this even better than I get it. So you know what? Take care of it. And sometimes that might be the only amount of faith we can muster is, all right, God, just take care of it. And as we go forward, trusting him, it's amazing how he will surprise us.
We also know that the widow's mite was worth more than the great donations made on the altar. That the widow mite was the most loved by the Lord because she gave all that she had. even though it was a small amount. And I thought about the story in the Bible about Elijah and the widow. And in this story, this is in First Kings, I believe, and he has come to the city, and he's commanded to go there by the Lord. And he meets a widow, and the Lord tells him that he needs to ask of this widow for water and for food. And the widow kind of looks up at him, sort of shocked, and says, I'm sorry, I have just enough of this flour and meal and oil, that I was going to make a cake for me and my son, and then we were going to die. She's very direct about it. And he says, I have to imagine that it must have been kind of hard for him to say this, but he was literally directed by God to do so. And he says, come bring me a little cake first, and I promise you will be blessed. He says, don't be afraid, and which goes back to your idea of worry. Make the loaf for me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. And she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with what the Lord had spoken. And I don't know, I just thought of, like, you think about the incredible burden that was on this woman, and here she's being asked. There had to be a side of her that was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? But
that would have been me for sure.
Yeah. But in the end, that her having that faith and being pushed to that level caused her to have the greatest miracle of her life.
Yep.
And so I think that's really an incredible story. And then we have to remember, in those tough times when we are pushed,
yep,
that we have to remember that God has a reason. He has that we have to have some trust.
Yeah.
When we have those worries, when we feel burdened, because that's definitely something. I mean, I've dealt with anxiety in my life, and I still do. And having that trust can be hard. It can be really hard.
Yep. And that's what I love about these devotionals we're doing right now. Because like you, I have my ups and my downs. I really do. And sometimes I don't even realize where my treasure is kind of slipping. Mm-hmm. And this story that you brought up of Elijah is so powerful, because this woman in this desperate situation had to put her treasure in God. So her feeding the man of God first is her taking her treasure and making God that treasure. Instead of making this final meal her treasure, God is her treasure. And this was a real act of faith. And when God was her treasure, he provided what she needed. When he was first, he provided everything that she needed. And God is anxious to provide for us. I just think sometimes we're not putting him first. And I know it's been that way in my life, where sometimes, like, I'm like, God, where are you? And he's like, I'm right here. Where have you been? And it's like, oh, okay. And so sometimes we do need to align ourselves, and sometimes his provision doesn't come how we think. I mean, Elijah ran. After doing tremendous miracles, he ran. And when he ran, God provided for him by feeding him food through ravens. Like, ravens brought him food. God will provide in the most extraordinary ways and in the most extraordinary circumstances. But there is this level of faith where I think we gotta trust him with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remember that our relationship with God is a relationship that we can turn to him and gain answers and comfort, and we can gain strength during these hard times that will help us to be able to get through them, and to not hopefully worry as much as we might otherwise be worrying. And as you say, and that the important thing is to remember that our treasure should be that relationship with God. Yes. That should be our greatest, most valuable gift that we protect above all else, that we cherish, is that relationship between us and our Heavenly Father.
And that's what Jesus said when he was talking in Matthew 6:33. He says, he kind of starts this worry thing off by talking about where your treasure is, there will the desires of your heart be. And then he goes through that list of worry and then ends in Matthew 6:33 with seek God first, seek his kingdom first,
Yeah.
his righteousness. In other words, seek his way of doing things first.
Yeah.
And he will add these other things to you. And so it's just that it's one of those things where doing this devotional this morning is like a check for me. It's like, you know what? I have been feeling a little bit discouraged. Like this week, I faced down some discouragement. And what a reminder this is of me is like, okay, it's fine. I'm human. That's normal for me to face discouragement. But it's also a perfect time to sit here and go, what am I doing? Am I putting God first? Have I made my relationship with him my treasure this week? Or have I made these other goals my treasure this week? And so it's one of those things that does make you sit down and ask that question. And it's an important question to ask.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let us know what you think about these things that we've talked about, what you think that the Lord is asking about in this commandment. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we really appreciate the comments that we get every week. They really edify us and build us up, and it's just really nice to know that other people are benefiting, and it's not just us. That's really great. So, Chris, where can people find you?
You can find me here on YouTube. My channel is called Durbania, and like I said, it's a great nerdy channel. Sometimes I just talk about nerd stuff, and a lot of times I take that nerd stuff and I talk about my faith in it. So I wanted it to be a nice, safe place for people of faith to come and hang out. And I want anybody, whether you have faith or not, to be able to come and enjoy it as well. And so come check out my channel, and I have a lot of cool stuff there. Right now, one of the fun things I just did, my 31 on 31 ranked 31 amazing superhero movies, worst to best.
And support him, because that's hard. Superhero reviews are brutal on YouTube.
They are.
So please, everybody go support. But yeah, check that out. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. Please check that out. And at the Hallmarkies podcast, we have such an awesome August coming up on Hallmarkies podcast. Just yesterday, we had my interview with Cindy Busby, actress Cindy Busby, and that was really fun to get to talk with her. So if you want really cool interviews and where we cover more than just Hallmark, but we love particularly holiday films and all things rom-com. So please check that out over there. I think you'd really enjoy it. And we have our Patreon group, which is really great. And we have our merch store. So all that fun stuff. So please check that out. And thank you so much. This is so great to do every week. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you, and hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Bye, everyone.